All right, Jill, good to see you. Others are rolling in. So I'm going to get going though, because we only have an hour and this may take more than an hour. This is some quick housekeeping. Remember that anyone involved with your organization can attend these mastermind mixers. These are for market smart customers and people who are taking the e-course. So if you're a customer here and you're not taking the e-course, you might want to consider it. If you are an e-course student, if you will, and you're not a market smart customer, you might want to consider becoming one. You know, not heavy-handed, but a little sales in there. You got to throw that in there. Feel free to share this meeting link with other people and make it monthly. Like if you enjoy this, of course, put it on your calendar and make it repeat. Because we'll be here. So hi, Robin, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Yes. And yeah, I already kind of pitched this, but remember that you can always, if you're not a customer, you can always get a demo, see what we're doing here, why we're growing so fast, why our retention rate is like off the charts. Hardly anybody ever leaves us and fires us, thankfully. Uh, so you could just get a demo and Sherry will talk to you. She's on this call. It's not, it's very collaborative, educational. It's not a lot of arm twisting. That's not our way. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to share good news. I don't know if I mentioned this, but every meeting at Market Smart begins with good news. So we always ask our team members to share something positive in their lives. Could be a business success or it could just be personal. So we'll do that real quick. But then we're going to get into the topic for the day, which is about establishing yourself as your supporter's guiding sage. This is, of course, based on Dr. James' research. And we're going to break into groups to do one super quick activity, which is we're going to ask ourselves to consider how others like lawyers, doctors, financial advisors, how do they take that position of the guiding sage? It's important that we position ourselves in that way, and I'll get into that. And we're gonna consider how they do it, so we can maybe riff off of that a little bit, you know, using my guitar playing lingo. Then we're going to come back, we're going to talk about how they do it, but then we're going to develop a value proposition for your product and service. I'm not talking about for giving, but for you presenting yourself as the trusted advisor, the guiding sage. And we're going to develop a value prop on that so that we can hone it down into an elevator pitch. So you end up with hopefully like one sentence that you say to, so people are like, well, I don't need, has anybody, by the way, raise your hand or just put it in the chat. Has anybody ever had a prospective major donor, legacy donor say, yeah, I don't really need your help. I'm good. I don't think I need you. Has anyone never had that? Right? Because they don't get it that you can make their experience exponentially better. And they don't get that because, well, they're used to people just going after their money and taking from them. They're not used to a guiding sage, number one. And number two is that we probably haven't defined our value proposition clearly enough so we can get it into an elevator pitch so people say, oh, that's what you do? Okay, I'm in. So that's what we're going to work on today. I hope this is valuable and everybody gets something out of it. If not, you can always message me and tell me to go pound sand, you know? All right, so good news. Let's start with good news. I'll tell you that my puppy is now, I think he's house trained. So that's my good news. It only took 10 weeks. So anybody else have any other good news? You could just put it in the chat if you want, or you can, and y'all don't have to give it, but you know, I know Jeff has good news because we just signed like a lot of customers this week already, and it's only Wednesday. Yeah. Oh, your puppy's 10 months. That's nice. Yeah. All right. Anybody else maybe on the Market Smart team with good news besides Jeff? Jeff's our sales guy, by the way, at least on this call. He seems really ferocious, right? No. Cat's 2 broken hips have healed. Good. Good for you. And Robin's hiring a legacy specialist. Big move. I didn't know that. Good for you. Wow. We must be generating a lot of leads for you. Yeah. All right, good. Well, thank you all for sharing the good news. All right, we'll get into today's topic now. We're going to talk about establishing yourself as the guiding sage. All right, good. My buddy Brian Powell's coming in, so that's good. We like him. He's one of our favorite customers. All right, so right out of the book, right out of the training, what Dr. James says about the role of the guiding sage is that it's important because it turns what he calls occupational stigma. This is, of course, Dr. James's words. They're always wonky, right? He's the scientist. Establishing yourself and embracing the role of the guiding sage turns occupational stigma into occupational esteem, which can be used to then turn administrator needs into donor opportunities. Like, what the hell does that mean? What that means is that fundraisers, according to his research, and I think you all would probably agree, are often put in stigmatizing situations by unknowingly, and not because they're mean or evil or nefarious, but by administrators, right? This makes them, the stigma makes fundraisers feel in a vice sometimes, like the illustration shows, or even worse, like ostracized. So sometimes they feel squeezed, sometimes they feel put out to pasture, like, we don't care what you have to say, just go get the money, kind of feeling. So when fundraisers are stigmatized or treated as others, it hurts their self-esteem, and it I think is one of the big reasons, and Dr. James does too, for such high rates of turnover in the space. Now, if we take the position internally and externally with our supporters, but internally too, as the guiding sage, as the facilitator between people with wealth capacity and your cause. I mean, that is, you're the connection, you're the synapse, and that deserves respect, but respect is earned, and earned partly by how you take that position. Right. So I'm going to equate that with like lawyers, doctors, and financial advisors that often are very comfortable with taking that position. And once you do, according to Dr. James, take that position, you can turn administrators' needs into donor opportunities. In other words, the administrators might say, well, we need to build we need to repair parts of the building. That's the administrator needs. Well, okay, I'm the conduit, I'm the facilitator, I'm the translator. So I'm here as the guiding sage, not just for the donor, but for the administrator, to help connect the dots. And if you allow me to take this position, we can turn that need of yours into a donor opportunity. For instance, maybe we can name it. Can we put that through? Can we get the board to agree that we name it? Or maybe there's other things that we can do with it, right? So then those become donor opportunities. So I hope that makes sense. If anybody doesn't understand, just write a note or speak up, because the group is small. But that's what Dr. James was talking about in that wonky message. Now, when it comes to the donors, you'll probably see that I'm going to bring up this in every Mastermind Mixer if you haven't been here before. And this is straight out of the fast track and out of all of Dr. James's research, is that there's this hero story that your donors are going through that happens especially for major gifts. For impulse-oriented, transactional, direct mail and whatnot, the process is very fast. It could happen in a minute or 5 minutes. But when we're talking about major gifts, this is highly deliberative, and the role of a major donor or prospect, they are seeing themselves as the hero in their own life story, who began with a certain identity, which may have even begun, like if you're at a college or university, could have begun decades ago. And that they're waiting for someone to challenge them, like Yoda, and ask them to make a choice, invite them to make a choice. But it has to be collaborative. It has to be something that they want to do, and they need help. They need help understanding why they want to do it and why they should do it and how they can do it. So Dr. James brilliantly put this into all his research, is that this is the hero cycle. This is the journey, and this is what the sage, you, are helping people move through. I won't go through this much more because it's a big part of the training. Hopefully you've gotten to it or in the training. But what we're going to talk about today is that I'm imploring you to take that position. This is actually just playing a joke on these pictures, is that, so, okay, like pretend Yoda is actually in this, because you've all seen the movie, so I'm taking this out of context, but let's pretend that Yoda is actually telling Luke to be a sage. And he says, okay, I'll give it a try. And Yoda says, no, try not. Do or do not. There is no try. Anybody remember that from the movie? Anyway, so a few head shakes. Yeah, so that's enough for my comedy today. So a few more minutes on all this, and then we're going to break into an activity. But it's important that we recognize, and this is beyond Dr. James's research, this is my stuff, on why donors need a sage. It begins with the fact that, in my humble opinion, most people don't really know how to give money away. Now, the biggest example, and I wrote about this in my book, Engagement Fundraising, which, by the way, I give away for free. If anybody wants it, just chat with us or email us. If anybody remembers when Oprah gave away, I think it was Toyotas, to everybody in their studio audience one day. I mean, she gave everybody Toyotas. And that was the beginning of her philanthropic journey. She didn't know how to give her money away. She had so much. And she ended up finding out that wasn't a good thing to do. It was fun, but it really didn't advance her hero story and make significant impact in the world. It wasn't until she learned on her own, but it was Nelson Mandela who taught her how to be a philanthropist when she was in Africa with him. And he basically taught her, look, if you really want to do this right, I can show you ways that you can do it. And he showed her that she could build schools in Africa, and she did. So she needed a sage to show her how to give her money away more impactfully. Now, let's turn away from Oprah for a second, because most people are actually not as wealthy as Oprah, but most people are, like Oprah, first generation wealthy. That's FGWs, I call them. And that's the acronym that came out of this report, where they found that 72% of first generation wealthy individuals are actually self-made, and 20%, the other 20% inherited a very small amount, so they don't fit as entirely self-made, but that's 93% almost. And then there's 7.4%, well, they inherited their wealth. But what's interesting about this is that the numbers are kind of growing. So first generation wealthy, that cadre, that cohort is growing. And the number of people who inherited their wealth is shrinking. It's fascinating, right? Now, first generation wealthy people really pride themselves on being modest. They're not snooty. They don't want to go to galas. That's not their thing. They don't even understand it. They have a lot of agency. Most of them are entrepreneurs. And because of that, they really appreciate freedom and this kind of Lone Ranger mentality, where they're like, I'll go it alone. I'll figure it out. I don't really need help, but these are the people who actually do. They do need help, and they need to be convinced that they don't politely, that they don't know how to. They spent their lives accumulating money, not figuring out how to give it away. But in people who inherit wealth, they grew up with family members who taught them how to give, how to be philanthropists. Another point about this, of why they need you as a sage, is because you sort of compete with advisors, financial advisors, who tend to be more preservationists. They want to keep and grow the money, especially because they get a percentage of it, or fees. They're usually not thinking about giving it away. And then there's the other point. The last point is that many of these first generation wealthy, or any major donor prospect, is feeling an erosion of trust. In general, our society is becoming less trusting. However, doctors, lawyers, financial advisors, and others are really good at taking the position of counselor and sage. So our first activity is like, we're gonna break into groups, I think, if there's enough people to do small groups, and we're just gonna spend 5 minutes and bang off, like, what do lawyers. It's funny, I mentioned to my wife, I was doing this morning before she went out, and she said, a joke as she left, she said, yeah, the doctor, he tells me to take off my clothes and put like a napkin on. That's how he takes the position of, like, I know he's going to be telling me what for later. So that's an odd way to think about it. But I think financial advisors, lawyers, they all do some other different things. So we'll come back and we'll add to this list. But unless there's any questions, I don't see any. Let's just break down into groups and have a little chat. I think we are. So I'm going to come out of the, let's see, here, because I heard some things. I was in one of the meetings and I heard some things that helped me begin to create a list here. However, well, I'll start by hearing that one person mentioned that they ask a lot of questions, or I'll just say they ask questions of the donor. That was you, Cecilia, if you don't mind, right? You said you prepared for the meeting where you're going to take the position as the sage, and you ask questions. But I found it fascinating, by the way, that you agreed this is a big challenge, especially for you, and you've handled very complex situations and people. Would you mind recounting that for the group? Whoops, you're on mute. Sorry.
I handled a very complicated charitable remainder trust that involved a piece of property that had debt on it. It was valued at $40 million. Wow. So, it was very complicated. It involved 2 donors with their different sets of advisors, plus the campus council. But I pulled it off in 2 to 3 months. So
wow,
it happened. Yeah.
But they didn't. They were not sure that they asked you if you were qualified.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, especially with planned giving, you're working with the donors' advisors, right? Mm-hmm. You're talking about CPAs and lawyers and all that. And, I am an advanced certified fundraising executive and a certified specialist in planned giving. But, they basically, in the beginning, they didn't know how to do this because they were trying to do it for 5 years and never succeeded because of the debt on the property. Generally, you can't take property with debt into a CRT, but you can if it's 5 years old. The debt is 5 years old, and the lien holder agrees. So I had to structure it in a way to enable us to pull that off, right? And so I actually proposed the structure, how to structure the gift, And all of the advisors accepted it, including campus council. So that's
So
a big, yeah.
when you began this relationship, you hit on another thing is, so you ask questions before you meet.
Uh-huh.
And then, but you just mentioned your credentials. Did you
Yes.
share, do you do that as a practice, share your credentials for?
I generally don't always talk about it.
Mhm.
I find that most people don't even know what an advanced certified fundraising executive is, because it's very specific to our profession, or a certified specialist of plan giving. They know what a CPA is or a lawyer is, and so on. So they're kind of like, what does that mean? So I think essentially, you know, I think it comes right down to the relationship building. If you think about it, you know, becoming a sage can be one where you don't necessarily take center stage or say that you're a sage, you're the expert, you know, because I never did that. I don't actually say I'm the expert. I mean, you can't say that to this group of like advisors, you know.
Right.
But if you know, what I try to do is I really talk to all of them and make sure that I kind of orchestrate it quietly, you know, and pull together everything. And then I kind of keep everybody on the same page and move them along the process. And so when they realize that's what I'm doing, they're kind of grateful, because that needs to happen, right, for the process to unfold and complete. And then they start to rely on me. So I actually get to the point where the donors don't even talk to their advisors anymore. They just call me directly, you know, through the process. But that's, you know, it's your behavior and the way that you work with everybody. So I don't actually assert that I'm the sage. I avoid that.
Yeah, so you don't do it in a crass way, but you do clearly do it in a very very nonchalant kind of way. Yeah, and Catherine writes here, just posting your credentials, degrees, certification with your name, the way
Yes.
you have on the Zoom and email signature, that can do the trick. Thank you for that, Catherine. Appreciate that. Anybody else have some thoughts of what others do and maybe you do to establish that kind of role? I have some other thoughts. Someone else will just jump in if you take yourself off mute. I can't see everybody at the same time while I'm typing. Happy to be interrupted. Someone else mentioned that they share stories of how they helped others. And Dr. James talks about that specifically in his research, that is a very powerful way to establish credibility through storytelling. And people can envision themselves. He often says, if you see him speak, when he's pretending that he's having a discussion with a donor, he says, well, let me tell you a story about how I just helped another donor just last week with that same problem. I don't know if you all have seen him do that, but yeah, so sharing stories, it's like, okay, you've been around the block.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you wouldn't be able to tell that story if you hadn't. Any thoughts on that, anybody, before I go to another one?
I would think telling a story, not to just tell it to bolster your own credentials, but to say, you know, kind of draw some similarities between another donor and the donor you're working with, which kind of on the side says, I've already done all this, I know what I'm doing, but also this person also did it, that means you can do it too.
Yeah, so it's the power of social norms in addition to establishing credibility and trust. Sorry, somebody else was just about to speak, I think.
Oh, sorry, did I interrupt? I'm sorry.
No, not at all. I just building on that, I think in our group, we talked about the social norms a bit. And I think with stories, you have to be careful because you don't want people to think, oh, she's not paying attention to me anymore. She's thinking about something else. But so one of the things we talked about is building trust by listening to the person, not just, jumping in and all over them, which is reflected in everything you've been saying here. And perhaps saying, when you share the story, gosh, I worked with somebody, their situation sounds similar, would this be helpful to you? So you're asking them to sort of engage that way, right? So showing through the story that you are listening, I guess, is what I'm saying. And Catherine said something really good on our call, or on our little group, about dressing the part, and I know originally we were always told, don't wear a power suit because the people you're visiting are, retired. They don't necessarily want to be overwhelmed. But she's pointing out that, if you're dealing with very high net worth people, especially if they're not retired and elderly and everything else, you want them to know they're comfortable with you, that you're on their same page. I thought that was a really good.
I agree. Anyone else? I got a couple more ideas, and of course, I'm intimately understanding Dr. James' research. One of the things he mentioned was that when you ask questions, it's okay to be fairly pragmatic in your way of doing it. It's not judgmental. It's just like doctors do it. Does it hurt here? How about over here?
Yeah.
And these can be fairly probing questions. Like, financial advisor has no problem just asking you, what's your net worth? What's the value of that property? How did you acquire that property? I mean, it's just very matter of fact. Anybody have anything about that or done that? There was one other. Oh, and I think it was Cecilia who said sometimes many times she'll prep people for the call by sending information in advance. Was that you, Cecilia?
Yeah. I would send not a lot of information, just information that was very specific, maybe to their particular situation. I mean, you know a little bit about the asset. They usually approach you and say, I have this asset, this rental property or whatever, and I don't want to handle it anymore. So you kind of know, okay, and then you look at their age and so forth. So then you send them like very, kind of like a teaser, like an appetizer information. And the other thing that I wanted to say was that, it's important to also like sort of build your reputation, which usually comes out of your past accomplishments, right? Your past relationships and you're working, the way that you've handled other donors. So, I found that, like, for instance, this trust that I worked on, after, we completed it, everybody in the community, all of the advisors in the community actually then knew that I could do that, right? They actually voted to make me the president of the board then.
Wow. Okay.
For the estate planning council, which I didn't ask for, but that's what they wanted to do. Because then they recognize, the lawyers and the CPAs, they recognize that I could actually do that. So, the reputation is also based on your accomplishments, like in your track record, so to speak. They talk to each other. Counselors talk to each other, and the donors talk to each other.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so do your colleagues, right? If you want to be introduced to someone who has expertise, you've got to build your reputation with them too.
Yeah.
So that's another, but I was thinking about that, building your reputation as being a really key point. And that's what a lot of financial advisors do. They'll say, oh, an internationally recognized speaker on financial matters, an educator, or this or that, as part of their bio. Having your bio out there is important too.
Does anybody write content for publications or anything, or speak? Anybody out there a speaker?
I used to speak at conferences and, provide case studies and so on.
I used to do that in my past business, but not this one.
I do it a heck of a lot. So I should start leveraging that. I never think to mention it to donors, you know, but I should.
Builds credibility.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look, we have so much more to do, but this turned into pretty interesting, I thought. So I'm gonna move ahead and see if we can get into the other things. Whoops. Okay, so we talked about all this. And yeah, one thing that Dr. James says, I won't get into it deeply, but in the training, he talks about job titles and how convincing your board and your administrators to allow you to have a outward facing job title that may be different than what's, you know, your human resources job title. One that is, because he found that most of the job titles that fundraisers have in his research, he shows all the data, but they actually are sort of off-putting to donors. So, you know, anyway, I'll leave that to in there. So the next activity, which we'll all do together because we have a small enough group, is we're going to create a value proposition for you. I want you to think about yourself as a product, a value that you deliver to both your donors, the benefactors, and the administrators, so that you can help the beneficiaries, right? You're straddling the fence. And I just, one of our friends, Tammy, who's not on the call, but I liked this. I just saw it right before the meeting. She writes her little elevator speech almost is she's partnering with generous donors to experience the joy of philanthropy. I thought that was nice. I don't know, maybe not for everybody. Okay, so this looks very complicated, but don't worry, I'm going to break it down. This is what we call a value proposition canvas. Okay, and we're going to start over here with the product and service map, and we're going to break that down. You can see I'm going to start in the bottom left hand corner. We're going to look at features and benefits of you. What are your, and we might not be able to get through all this, but I'll break out of this so that I can type. But let's start by thinking about what are the features, not the benefits, but the features. Like what do you have that's a feature that's worthy of adding to your value proposition? I know that one of you mentioned that you have credentials. So that's kind of a feature. If we get to the benefit, we can talk about what that means, but just anyone have a couple other features besides just credentials?
Longevity with the organization. I'm at a university and the alums keep complaining about the turnover, and I'm now in my 5th year here, which gives me some more legitimacy.
Excellent point. Very important, especially for donors who have seen turnover. They want that.
Greg, I'll say that a beneficiary of the organization. So a graduate, grateful patient, et cetera, because recognizing there's lots of different organizations, but.
That is very important. That's like saying, hey, your dollars helped someone like me. And yeah, you've got keen insights that others wouldn't have. Brilliant. Any other features?
Educator.
Oh, like professional, like trained educator.
Yeah, like I am faculty on the CAGP's big courses.
Oh,
So training other gift planners.
that's interesting. Yeah. You getting the idea here? So these are the features. Okay, we got that. So those are pretty good for starters. Of course, you could take this on your own, but let's go to some benefits then. So if we look at the credentials, like what is the value? What is the benefit to a donor that you have credentials, for instance, or that you have longevity with the organization?
Trustworthy.
Experience.
Helping them find meaning in their life
through philanthropy, have experience doing that. So you can simply help them do that too.
Mm-hmm. What was the beneficiary of the organization? So maybe with that, it's like, I can give you insights that others can't. Whoever it was who mentioned that, why did you mention that feature? What's the benefit? I don't know.
The benefit is just simply that they can have a smooth experience, in trying to sort of find meaning in their life through giving. It's not something they have to figure out on their own. They've got a sage, someone who's been down the path to sort of guide them.
Yeah, that you understand them.
I think relatability. You can relate to them because you've either, like he said, be a patient of the hospital, or you were a student at the college. So you can relate to those donors who are giving back and believe in the organization also.
Got it.
And along with the credentials and the longevity, there's, I've seen a lot. We can be creative about the solutions I can offer you. Something along those lines.
Yeah, or like avoid common mistakes, basically. I mean, that's almost what you're usually going to a sage for, in a way, is more avoiding failure in a way at times than something else.
Well, I find that actually emphasizing that you're there to serve them and being responsive to them goes a long way. They really like that. Sometimes just being responsive to them is already enough. Then they know you're the go-to person.
Yeah, giving them a direct contact. They're not going to have to just throw their request into the abyss and hope someone gets back to them. They have a specific person who's, they can go to within the organization.
It's so interesting you mentioned that. I think that was Cecilia.
Mm-hmm.
We all go through life constantly disappointed with lack of responsiveness and dependability, whether it's at a restaurant or, or at the dentist's office.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much to prove to people that you are their sage.
Yeah.
So you're talking about just responding to them will help earn that. No words necessary. Brilliant.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that. And then what Jeff said is kind of like being their navigator in this unknown world, especially with new philanthropists. They don't always know what they don't know.
So I'll even go back to this, is that it's a navigator. I'm a navigator. That's my feature, but the value proposition, I guess, or the benefit is that I can help you avoid common mistakes. Hold your hand.
Good. Yeah. Jeff was our navigator in coming on board with Market Smart. And it took him a long time because we were we were slow, but he was great. So
he's very patient, well-trained, and in fact, Jeff is doing the role that you all do. In case that isn't clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess following up on the navigator word is that actually what we all do is map the process out for the donor, right? Because they wanna get from where they are to their philanthropic goal. And as the guiding sage, what we're really doing for them is mapping it out for them. And with that gift that I mentioned, that's exactly what I did. I mapped it out for them and for their advisors. Here's how we're going to get there, by providing the structure for that gift. You do the timeline and so on. So, and then people then have a sense of, okay, she knows what she's doing. She's going to get us there.
Yeah. So I'm going to put this in Dr. James' speak. He would say that you can help people visualize the victory they can attain in order to enhance their identity. Yep. So I'm going to move on. You're getting the idea, and I hope this is helpful to help you, put together your own value proposition and how you will explain it. So the third part of this part of the canvas is thinking about what it will feel like to the donor to use your product, right? So we talked about features, we talked about benefits, but what does it feel like for the donor then? What would they say if they told their friend, you know what, I just worked with Cecilia and the experience was so great because. It's probably a lot of rehashing of what we already said.
It was easy. She managed the project, the process for us so that we didn't have to guess or worry. She, was responsive and informative, all these types of things. I'm thinking of the testimony I wrote for the guy who helped me with my mortgage recently. Those are the things I wrote basically.
Perfect.
Well, I wonder, Jill, since you mentioned you worked with Jeff, like what else besides these things? And gosh, I hope he did all those things.
Oh gosh, it was easy. He managed the process. He was responsive and informative. And he was patient.
We worried a little bit though, so I don't know if I.
Oh yeah, I know. He was patient. And when he didn't know the answer, he found it for us, and he listened to what we needed and what our pain points were. I don't know if you put this all in your own value proposition, but it is kind of what you want to be seen as. The other factor, and this goes with Market Smart as well as with our charities, I always say when we hold an event, we want the people who come to the next day or that afternoon to go back into their offices, go back to their families and say, wow, you won't believe what I learned today. You've got to have that wow factor as part of the experience. And, I think with Market Smart, obviously the system is part of the wow factor, not just the guiding sage, but you want to be able to put that out there.
Thank you, Jill. Well, and by the way, that's what we call in behavioral science, and I'm not a behavioral scientist, I pretend to be one, but that's what we call the feeling of awe. Okay, so what makes experiences great is a level of remarkability, period. I like to call it awe. This is why we're all addicted to our phones and all this, because and people are addicted to TikTok because it's remarkability after another. People love remarkability.
Greg, I was thinking of the word sincerity because I feel like I'm thinking about Sage, and maybe I'm overthinking about this, and maybe it's just me, I'm alone, but one of the benefits is not that we have all the answers, but I see here finding the answers that we don't know. I think that speaking with sincerity is an absolute key. And it's something you want the donors to experience as well. So.
Yep. You want someone sincere.
That made me think of, and I think it relates to Dr. James, in a way, but this doesn't have to be a part of the experience. But I think a good sage is sort of truly Socratic in their methodology. They don't just tell you what to do, they help you come to that conclusion on your own. Yeah. And that sort of blends with sincerity. But another thing that makes me think of, Greg, is how we read The Challenger Sale is a book that we read internally, but a sage has to challenge you. You do need to be challenged. If you didn't need to be challenged, you probably didn't need to go to them. They need to help you confront something that you're going to overcome in some way. It doesn't have to be a bad thing.
And it's really interesting how much all what you're saying ties into Dr. James's research. The sage challenges you to make a choice. They provide an opportunity to gain a victory that will enhance the donor's identity, either internally or externally, publicly or privately. Yep. So I'm going to move it along because we only have a few more minutes before we wrap it up, but I want to mention that, so we finished the first side of the value proposition canvas. We kind of just banged it out right there, right? We talked about why and we talked about what. I'm going to skip over to the other side, the far right side, and consider what gets in our way, or what gets in the donor's way, or what are we afraid of, if you will. They like to call it here the competing solutions that we need to be mindful of as we develop our own value proposition. I think inertia is a big one. Like, how many of you have heard of people who are thinking of making a gift, and then like it's just months and months and months go by, and you're like, are they ever going to do it? Right? So there's inertia there, and your job to a degree is to be that gentle prod. I know that we like to be politely persistent here at Market Smart. We don't want to drive people away when we're selling to them. We actually like to call it serving them. Sales has such a bad connotation. We are selling, but we serve. We don't call it an upserving. We never call that upserving when a client buys more from us. We only call it upserving at Market Smart. Little insider baseball here. But inertia, polite prodding. And then another thing, and I'm kind of doing this homework for you for a minute here, is the substitutes, as Dr. James says, that we have to recognize is the great competitor for all of you is the donor advised fund / family foundation.
Yeah.
So if you don't think or didn't feel like you had competition before, and I'm not talking about other charities, because what donor advised funds and family foundations are doing to the charitable landscape in competitive way against your own purpose is nothing close, is so much greater than what any particular charitable entity can do as a competitor. So you have to recognize that the substitutes, the DAF and the family foundation, are your competitor, and your value proposition has to be better than theirs. And you need to let the administrators know that that's their competition. As Dr. James talked about in his research in depth, is he found that that is the singular best way to compel administrators to wake up.
Yeah.
I see some of you are giggling. So like, has someone tried that internally, like, and mentioned that to get them to stop behaving? Jill, I'm going to put you on the spot because you're laughing. What are your thoughts?
Oh, well, I went through this a few months ago when our senior leadership team was putting together their sort of SWOT, and what are some of the threats? And I gave them numbers showing them the growth of DAFs in Canada alone is exponential. And of course, there's the background of what happened in the States. And I don't think it's on a lot of fundraisers' radar. And like you've done, I mean, we both need to define our value proposition versus a DAF in a very polite, way, not look like a competitor, but at the same time, we need to work with them. And so the widget, that you guys offer is brilliant. I'm so pleased with how it works on our system, because the reality is that the donor advised funds can offer people a lot of what they want. And so I was just noting down here when you were talking about it, the additions to the value proposition being, you want to tell them you can be discreet because privacy is a big thing with the donor advised fund.
Brilliant.
Recognition. You're not going to get the recognition if you put your money in a donor advised fund instead of giving it directly to the charity. And direct immediate impact and accountability, like those are all things we got to think about for our organization's value proposition, if not our own. And I also want to give a shout out to Sherry, who was, you know, when you talk about polite persistence, she was a big part of the process too. And then you've told us before, always be offering, you know, we're not always asking. We should be offering. And that's important for that inertia stage.
Well, thank you, Jill. I mean, we only have 1 minute left, so I'm gonna wrap it up and mention that we didn't exactly get through the whole value proposition. I hope this jingled some bells and got you all thinking about it. Really, the next step in the process is to go to developing the elevator pitch. So that is, in other words, to take everything we talked about with features, benefits, your experience, and also with being mindful of the competitors and the inertia. And you really want to get to writing down and thinking about these in like 1 or 2 sentences, and maybe even like a slogan like Tammy did in her LinkedIn profile. But you want to have that in your back pocket, so that you can pull it out, so to speak, and be able to explain, or at least help people understand, even if it's just because you're signaling the value proposition you provide. So I hope that was all helpful. If anybody has final words or thoughts that they want to share, I'd love to hear about it as we round the top of the hour. No? Going once.
Well, I'll share that I'm inspired actually to go back to this donor who Cecilia and I were talking about in our discussion group, and offer to put together a proposal for his legacy to leave a chair and some, you know, research funds to carry on the work that he's been doing.
Yep. Good luck. Good luck, Charlie.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's in lieu
Call
of
me
taking his
anytime.
real estate.
Call me anytime.
Thank you.
While we're wrapping up, I do want to mention in the portal for the course, you can find Cecilia easily. I mean, you can probably find her on LinkedIn.
She'll be sorry you said that.
Yeah, but you
No,
can
it's
find
okay.
anybody who's taking the course, and you can ask questions in the course, you know, and we can create more of a community. But I do want to thank all of you. I hope you're getting value out of these. It's a little hard for me to tell sometimes, but if you ever have ideas that you or you want to share, critiques, just reach out to me. Everybody knows I'm super accessible, and I'd love to hear it. And we'll be back next month, same time, same channel.